Started.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the 38th episode of Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. Today is Tuesday, September 16, 2025. It is 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the US, and it is 4:30 p.m. in India. We are having a conversation with Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, a distinguished retired diplomat who served India in foreign service for 37 years. He studied history for 5 years at St. Stephen's College in India and subsequently joined his illustrious service and has represented India in diplomatic missions in multilateral organizations very effectively. Besides Hindi, English, and other Indian languages, he also speaks French and Chinese. And we are going to have a conversation with Ambassador Anil Wadhwa on the geoeconomics of world oil trade. This has become a very hot issue with Trump 2.0 putting sanctions on various countries about their purported oil purchases from Russia. So welcome to the Council for Strategic Affairs, Sir Anil Wadhwa. Welcome to our platform.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you have been following this particular issue, and I see that in media you have been interviewed by different platforms on the same issue. We had 25% sanctions on imports from India, but then additional 25% tariff, punitive tariff for purchasing oil from Russia. Now, the story does not end there. President Trump is asking G7 and NATO countries to have unified sanctions of 100% on any country that buys oil from Russia. What is your take on all these things from a diplomatic perspective and from free trade perspective, sir?
So I think all issues that you mentioned are interlinked in my view. They have a sequence, and the main issue here is that Trump has tried, or the Trump administration has tried very much to use all means possible to end the conflict in Ukraine. The only way that it seems to them that to put pressure on Russia now is to stop somehow their exports of oil, which in their view gets the revenue required to fund the war, fund in inverted commas. So there is a question mark over this kind of hypothesis. And I've been speaking about this extensively by saying that just by putting extra tariffs on India, and so far India is the only country, by the way, and we'll come to why that has happened, on which the extra 25% tariffs have been put. So the total amount of tariffs on India now amount to 50% on selected exports, not all exports, but selected exports. And that affects about 48 billion dollars worth of exports from India into the United States. But frankly speaking, there are question marks about why it was the tariffs were imposed when they were, the timing first of all. Secondly, on whether they can be imposed or should have been imposed only on India, that's singling out India. And third, whether there is any efficacy in stopping trying to stop exports of Russian oil to other parts of the world, because it also immediately creates a crisis in prices all over the world. And on all three counts, I think the arguments are quite flawed. First of all, I think India was in the middle of negotiations with the United States. A package was prepared to put up to the president, and the USTR had also signed on to this package. But in President Trump's view, it was not enough. There was not enough market access as far as the US is concerned for its product into India, and there were no big ticket announcements which should have been there in the package. So the only way, according to the advisors of President Trump, to uh, have India have India given to more concessions was perhaps to put in these extra 25% tariffs, which priced out the Indian exports of $48 billion, which actually has, in my view, a counter effect, because the consumers in the United States are deprived of products which are at much cheaper prices. Secondly, because the competition is reduced, so the countries from which these products can be procured obviously find themselves in a monopolistic position. There are two or three others who can replace India combined in some of these labor intensive industries. And obviously, the prices will be passed on then to the American consumer. Second is the question of timing, and I think we are very clear about that because we were in the middle of negotiations. And India was, of course, singled out because although China is the biggest importer of Russian oil, India has been the number two importer since 2022 when the discounts were offered on Russian crude. And of course, there is Turkey, which buys a substantial amount of oil from Russia as well. Plus, there are other countries in Asia which do so in smaller quantities. There are also the transshipment hubs like UAE and Singapore, which also buy small amounts of Russian crude. So, there are a number of countries, and in Europe itself, there are a couple of consumers still which are heavily dependent on the Russian oil. United States at the moment is engaged, as we all know, in a readjustment on the economic front with the Chinese, and that seems to be the reason why the extra tariffs were not imposed on China. The reason given was that already the tariffs were pretty high on Chinese products, and to increasing that to a much higher degree would actually kill all enthusiasm for those talks to proceed. And as far as Europe is concerned, Turkey, etc., we know that there has been an agreement which has been reached in return for certain amounts of investments into the United States, on which there is still some clarity which is not there at the moment. And we have to find that clarity which is not forthcoming from anyone. Even with countries like South Korea and Japan, there's been some disputes over what exactly has been agreed upon by way of investments into the United States. So we have a very fluid situation on all these counts. Third issue is about whether there is an efficacy in actually slapping tariffs on countries for buying oil from Russia. Well, if these tariffs are imposed on more countries, as President Trump is urging the EU to do, then of course we will have a situation where the price of oil in the market will shoot up, and many countries in the global south who actually depend on imports for their economy will be in a bad situation. And countries who are more populous, like India, which depend a lot on imports for running their economy, will be in a worse situation. So all in all, I think it's not a very satisfactory solution to this question. And of course, we can discuss how it can become a satisfactory solution if at all, there is some patience on both sides to go forward and negotiate on this.
You know, there have been some pronouncements from Trump administration members, whether they are, Commerce Secretary or whatever, that thou shall not buy oil from Russia at all. You buy oil from United States. That has been the injunction. And my understanding is that India has increased the purchase of crude from United States also. How competitive cost-wise is crude import from US versus Russia?
So, there used to be a differential of $15 to $25 when the Russians started discounting their oil at the beginning of, the period in 2022 because it was badly needed. And the exchange was badly needed by the Russians at that point. But today, if you look at the differential, it's come down to somewhere around 1.5 to 3 US dollars. So the differential really is not much. And also the fact that there have been targeted, I would say, sanctions on companies, for example, which finance Russian oil, and also in European shipping lines are targeted if they carry Russian oil. So that's made it much more difficult for Russian oil to be carried in tankers. Of course, there have been circumventions because UAE and others who are strong in shipping, like the Greeks, for example, they have floated their own companies to circumvent this, which are registered and based elsewhere and not in Europe. But the result is that the costs have gone up. The insurance costs have also gone up for Russian oil, and so the differential has really come down. So when you come to that situation, then of course there's very little to choose between one source and the other source. And I think countries like India, for example, would be in a position to diversify, would be in a position to buy from United States. And I think we've seen that happen, in fact, over the last 1.5 years or so, 1.5 months or so, where the diversification has taken place. India is buying much more from the UAE and much more from the United States.
India is purchasing oil after Russia, the second country from which the oil imports are at number two spot is actually Iraq. So India has said that we will diversify oil procurement from any country which is cost competitive from Indian perspective. Now, in that process, should India be buying oil from Iran?
So that's a very good question. In fact, there is no specific sanction on Iranian oil. And in fact, the Chinese have been buying large quantities of Iranian oil in the recent past. But you have a situation where a couple of Chinese companies have been sanctioned because they were supposedly by buying oil and also by taking part in these activities, supposedly helping the terrorist activities which are being perpetrated by Iran. And this, of course, is the United States, which makes that determination. There is no UN sanction, as you know, um, on any count whatsoever against any other country. But these are unilateral sanctions. So, if countries are willing to withstand that and they stand up to these, then of course there's no bar on buying oil from Iran as well.
In the same vein, uh, there were sanctions on purchasing oil from Venezuela. And then prior to Venezuelan election, those sanctions were relaxed. What is the situation? Is India still buying oil from Venezuela? Is it cost competitive because it has to be transported again from American continent, so the freight costs are high? Should India be buying oil from Venezuela despite US, you know,
So, Dr.
asking?
Adityanjee, I think we go back to the fundamental question. When companies, in fact, oil is not bought by the state, but by companies either private or by governmental companies, which are importing from various sources. First criteria, of course, is you go for the cheapest source. Second criteria is diversification. And third criteria is you can get that oil, an equivalent kind of oil from elsewhere, without the threat of sanctions or risk, then you go for the risk-free option. So I think Venezuela now falls in the category of a risky proposition. And obviously, because of the US posture towards Venezuela, we now find ourselves in a situation where companies are hesitant to deal with Venezuela. And that's happened not just with India, but I think all over the world. It is common that, of course, if it's a state run company, then they have much more of a decision making in their favor if the state stands up for a certain decision. But India has not said whether any company should buy from one source or the other. The state has not determined that whatsoever in any case, whether it's a private company or whether it's a governmental company, and left it to the free market as it should be. And that's where we are.
I think in the drive for diversification, in the current fluid situation, would it make sense to purchase oil and energy from Canada? Canada has been exporting all its energy south of the border to United States. And now there's a threat of sanctions on Canada also. So yes, our relationship with Canada was somewhat strained because of antiques of a former Prime Minister of Canada. Should it be the time, opportunity on part of both countries to repair the relationship and strengthen the economic relationship, so the markets that Canada is losing from United States and opportunities for export of energy products that was being sent across the border to United States could be exported to India?
I think there is an opportunity there. I would agree with you, and I think if the Canadian source is cheaper, once again we go by the cross criteria. And if that is competitive, then of course Indian companies should look seriously at diversification and also buy from Canada.
We come to the next issue. You talked about free trade. What is the status of WTO with all these unilateral sanctions, which are changing day by day by a mercurial politician that is governing a country, an important country? What is the status of WTO? Do we have any recourse to WTO to get relief from these sanctions?
So, so in on paper, of course, the WTO system exists. It's not functioning well, like the rest of the United Nations is not functioning well because of the fact that the implementation part of WTO decisions once again rests on all countries cooperating with it. When a powerful country like the United States does not cooperate and goes its own way and imposes these unilateral sanctions and tariffs, then of course it has its own system. Now, it's another thing if all countries around the world do not follow what the United States has told them to do and do not negotiate with the United States, but also say that they will have to follow the WTO principles and the rules and regulations set by the WTO. But that's not happened. And we've seen that country after country, continent after continent, has in fact tried to negotiate for themselves a deal with the United States. And we've seen that in terms of what's happened with Asia, many countries in Asia. We've seen that with Europe as a whole continent, which has accepted 15% tariffs, unilateral tariffs, and in return has also agreed to invest $750 billion into the United States. So it is a system which has evolved, which is not really fair or compatible with what WTO stands for. The older system of having a multilateral body which could regulate trade and which could rule in favor of the legal provisions of how trade is conducted, that is now moribund. It's not functional, and countries have by themselves decided to leave this authority of the WTO aside and deal with the United States in the new situation.
So there is some projection by GTRI that secondary to these sanctions and tariffs from United States, Indian economy might, go down by a 0.6 to 0.8% of annual GDP. Now, as a hedging strategy, what should India do so that the economy is not contracted because of these unilateral sanctions and tariffs?
So the only way to do this is to have a twofold approach. One is to make sure that there is some amount of diversification which takes place, and the labor intensive industries are able to export to some newer markets or to the markets they were exporting to, but in larger quantities, uh, even if that is at a much cheaper price than it used to be earlier. And secondly, is to make sure that there is a governmental support which is given to these kind of industries which will be affected by Trump's tariffs of extra 25%. While the sanctions are there, of course, the Indian products which face a total of 50% tariffs will be priced out of the US market. And the competitors will move in and they will fill in wherever that's possible. But at the same time, if India and the United States can come to some sort of an agreement over the next few months, and many say it's possible by before the end of this year, then the effect will be minimal because India exported a lot to the United States in the last month, just before the extra tariffs kicked in. And Indian companies actually worked overtime to make sure that whatever stocks they had and in products that they were selling to the United States, they could export to the United States because the buyers in the United States were also willing to stock up and to buy more in the older situation. So you have some sort of a cushion there for the moment, but that cushion will not last for too many months. And now we have a situation that the United States team was here today in New Delhi to set the framework for restarting the negotiations. And if today's talks go well, then of course we will have a situation where we'll have once again a resumption of delegation level talks, and we will have probably see much more progress than what has happened as far as the United States is concerned. As far as India is concerned, we already offered a very good package to the United States in the last round, which was not accepted. In fact, I'm told that about 60% of US goods into India would have come in at 0% tariffs, which is unprecedented as far as the Indian market is concerned. And that would have also cemented, future cooperation in many other fields. In fact, what I would like to stress here is that India-US relationship is not just trade and investments. It is also many other things. It's strategic. It's also, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategies of United States and India, they converge. There's a worldview. There is a question of democracies coming together, working on frontier technologies, for instance. There is the Quad question, and all that needs to be taken forward, in my view. So I think the earlier the two sides can reach an agreement on a package, the better it will be for both.
I think leaving the strategic issues aside, even in the economic realm, the relationship, should it be just confined to trade in goods? Should we talk about simultaneously trade in services, trade in consultancy, economic advantage that is accrued because of Indian students going to US universities, paying 3 times the fee for the native students, the amount of money that is remitted to United States for their daily, living, boarding, food, all those kind of things, and the money that goes to United States through Indian tourists. So you have to look at a comprehensive economic picture and not focus just on the trade in goods. And if you look at a total comprehensive economic relationship, it appears that there is no deficit to either country. We are actually balancing each other economically, whether you buy some more goods, we buy more services, we pay you $25 billion through students that come, they pay their fees, and we send more tourists to you who spend their hard-earned money. So that
You're
balances
absolutely
out.
right. You're absolutely right. And I think there have been a number of studies done on precisely this aspect about how much the United States gains by this relationship with India, the earnings that are there because of the student community which is in the United States. It's also the e commerce companies which operate in India. It's also the abolition of the taxes for consultancies. It's also the fact that there are a number of United States companies which are now engaged in consultancies in other fields rather than the economy. You take, for example, defense is just one of the examples, and the transfers of technology, royalty fees which are taking place. There is also the payments which are made to the US companies who come and inspect exports of Indian pharmaceutical products, which are actually helping the US economy in turn. So you should add up all this, and if you come to that figure, then you will find that actually the United States is a net gainer in this relationship already. And if we can reach a further agreement on opening up the Indian market, which India had in fact offered, then I think the United States in a much better position. So I think we have to be both sides need to be very calculating about this. They have to make sure that the overall gains are taken into account before concentrating on one particular field.
I agree with the general spirit and tenor of your, suggestion that both countries have to, advance this relationship. The problem comes when one side is totally irrational. How do you negotiate with an irrational situation, with an irrational mindset that you must do this, otherwise there'll be tariffs and sanctions? Is that really negotiation?
Uh, no, so Dr. Adityanjee, I think this is a situation that is faced not just by India; it's faced by many countries today while dealing with the United States, and that's why it becomes important to be in a situation where competitively you are at an advantageous position. India is not seeking 0% tariffs for its goods. It's seeking a situation where its exporters can export vis-a-vis exporters from other countries, and that's where there is a flexibility. I think India is today a very competitive country, especially in labor-intensive exports. It's one of the top three, if I would say, along with China and Vietnam. And if not the US market, they could also find a niche in some other markets. But the United States market has been a steady and set market for a number of years for many of these companies. So there are these mutual dependencies that have been built up. There's a certain amount of trust which has come in between US companies and consumers and the Indian suppliers. And I think they would like to preserve that because the methodology of dealing with a company in the United States is seen to be less complicated than in other parts of the world. Let me put it very clearly. And I think we are natural partners in that respect, in the way we do business with each other, with transparency, with clarity, with certain amount of trust. And that is why companies in India like to trade with the United States. As far as investments are concerned, then of course, sky is the limit. Today, of course, the United States is looking inwards, and President Trump would like as many companies as possible to invest in the United States. In fact, American companies also to invest back in the United States so that manufacturing comes back to the United States rather than sourcing from outside. I think many other countries around the world are doing the same. They would like to also make sure that their manufacturing goes up. In fact, India is doing the same. It has got its own PLI scheme, which is, and it's trying to use that to increase its share of manufacturing in the GDP to about 24-25%. Currently, it's at about 15-16%. And that is the aim of many countries around the world today, so that a precious foreign exchange is not spent on imports of goods. So I would not dispute President Trump that motivation, but of course there is a methodology which we all have differences on, and that methodology is unilateralism, because it has to be a system. Otherwise, there could be a chaotic situation going forward. And within this system which exists today, countries are trying to find their niche. And I think India is not worse off than many other countries because of its competitiveness.
I think that is granted. You mentioned that there will be a chaotic situation. It's not a question of there will be, there is a chaotic situation. It has been stated multiple times that Mr. Trump follows the theory of chaos. He deliberately creates chaos to his personal advantage. It was stated during his second electoral campaign during Republican primaries by one of his rivals, Nikki Haley, that rightly or wrongly, wherever he moves, there is chaos follows him. So there is a deliberate strategy seen as a consistent pattern. Now, if creating chaos is the strategy, can you rest aside that you sign a bilateral trade agreement and that will not be changed tomorrow or day after or something like that, while you are spending so much of energy coming to an agreement and continue to bend backwards by giving unilateral concessions after concessions, knowing that chaos is being deliberately created?
Yes, so that is precisely the point here. And I think we are seeing the effects of this strategy as far as countries who already signed so called agreements with the United States are concerned. I mentioned to you in the beginning about how the South Koreans and the Japanese, for instance, are facing difficulties in trying to translate what has been agreed at the top level in telephonic conversations onto paper. Plus the fact that the investments from a country, if they go into United States, they're going to be used as is desired by the Trump administration. And once the returns come in, then at that point in time, the profit sharing becomes heavily loaded in favor of the United States. So that is something which you cannot translate into concrete action on a piece of paper. And that's why countries are finding it very difficult. We had certain understandings, for example, which were reached telephonically with the leadership of Indonesia, which is in a similar situation at the moment. We have a similar situation as far as Europe is concerned, on the investment front. So while trading in goods, of course, takes place at a certain duty rate and most often it is between private companies, if not governmental companies, and that's how it is. And the money flows, and the deal is done. The amounts are settled, etc. But in case of investments, if there is an uncertainty, you certainly do face a problem.
So you
I
mentioned,
also am unclear about how the investments from the Gulf countries, the promised investments from Saudi Arabia and UAE, are going to translate themselves into concrete projects, for example, going forward over the next 5 years.
so the two examples you gave, South Korea and Japan, there are already consequences for both countries. The prime minister in Japan lost his job following a defeat in elections, having promised, I believe, $600 billion investments in United States. And Although Japan is a very servile nation to United States in all respects because of the post-World War II history, there's a lot of anguish in Japan about, the prime minister having succumbed to pressures to invest in United States in a very disadvantageous manner. And the same thing is happening in South Korea. South Korea has put a hold in bilateral investments in United States following a raid, an immigration raid on a South Korea sponsored, financed, and being built an electric battery plant somewhere in United States in Georgia. So that has, the workers were handcuffed and, treated very badly. So both the countries are facing the headwinds. Now, a wise nation would learn from other nations' example. These countries succumb to the pressure, agreed to what is generally perceived as bullying, to extort money in an international system. Should India be following the same example that, they want $500 billion investment from India? Should India be doing
So,
this?
so Dr. Adityanjee, is as far as India is concerned, the whole system is a little different from many other countries in that respect. We already have companies in India which have invested in the United States, which are willing to actually to invest more because they see a potential in earnings going up, going forward, even if the current situation persists in the United States. But as far as the government is concerned, to commit to a certain amount, saying that India will invest a certain amount into the United States, unless it is done through a government-run PSU, for instance, a public limited company, that of course is possible. We've done that in the past, but otherwise to randomly commit a certain amount in the Indian system is not possible. And I suppose it's something similar which exists in the United States as well, because you've got to answer to your parliament and to the parliamentarians. And that same system will be understood by the United States. So I think, asking other countries who have a system which is similar to the United States to commit upfront at the governmental level is not going to be possible. But there are other means in which this can be done. India certainly can invest more, it can buy more because there are complementarities in certain respects as far as the Indian and US economies are concerned. There is a defense trade which is very robust. There is also a need for petroleum and natural gas into India. It's another big ticket item, and also there is a need to do more in the scientific and technological fields, in nuclear reactors, for instance. All these are very promising areas, and there are big ticket items between the United States and India.
We talked about diversification, but we have not talked about de-risking. Looking at the pattern of behavior, there were serious attempts to negotiate a bilateral FTA in goods in 2019 during Trump's first term between India and US, and that did not materialize. And now we are facing tremendous difficulty. I wonder whether the policy establishment in India should be thinking of de-risking strategies. And while talking about de-risking strategies, I'm not suggesting decoupling.
Hmm. Uh, Yes, of course. I think the thought, of course, would have crossed their minds. But India of today is very different from India of 2019. We have actually opened up a lot to the outside world. We do much more with the outside world. Let's put it that way. We've seen some agreements with a number of countries now, even with the United Kingdom, for example. NECTA with Australia has happened. There's also the EFTA countries which have signed an agreement with India. The trade negotiations with the EU are advancing at a very fast pace, and I'm quite surprised to see that happen. But that is because there's political will now on both sides to take that forward. So India needs technology infusion. It needs goods. It also needs to interact with the outside world. And the fact that it has moved away from China-led RCEP and did not join it means that it needs to do other kinds of bilateral agreements, which will help it in the process of moving forward economically, both in trade of goods and creating value chains, supply chains all around the world, and also getting more investments into India. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the technology infusion which goes with that in order to upgrade the whole system, the societal change which is taking place in India, and the connectivity issues that have come up. There's the economy transition which is happening in India. So, all this requires an opening up and interaction with the outside world. So, today, in dealing with the United States, India deals with the United States with a different mindset. It is much more open and it is much more accommodating, I would say, than it was in 2019. It is also much more confident of handling this relationship. So that's the change which has come about, and I think it's going to reflect in how we negotiate when we resume negotiations with the United States in the coming days.
without compromising national sovereignty and national interests. If that
Absolutely.
add, it's okay to negotiate, but not on a one-way street.
Yes.
It was a pleasure to talk to you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Uh, Keeping in mind your vast diplomatic experience, it has been very enlightening talk. We started with oil, but we basically addressed the wide gamut of bilateral relationship and the peculiar situation we are facing with the current administration. The impact on economy of both countries are going to be there if we are not able to negotiate, and headwinds are there in US economy also. But it was a pleasure to talk to you, sir, and we hope that you will continue to grace our platform in future as well, not only on this topic, but on other topics also. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, bye-bye.